Hello. Today I'm just going to talk about how fact is much stranger than fiction. Now, first I'm going to start off by reading the Mark Twain quote that often gets slightly changed. So, the quote by Mark Twain goes, "Truth is stranger than fiction, but it is because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities. Truth isn't." Now, I attribute this to Mark Twain because I actually did research on it once, see where this quote came from. And the oldest mention of this quote at all I can find is attributed to Mark Twain himself. So therefore I'm fairly confident to say that this was a Mark Twain quote originally. But the idea still stands. I can actually just end the video here because Mark Twain's quote sort of does say it all. Fiction has to make sense and stick to possibilities, but the real world has no such obligation. So what I'm going to do instead is give examples of how certain things in reality, if you put them in fiction, would wind up being called hack writing or just seen as too unrealistic. And yet, there are examples of it in reality. So, I happen to love binge watching a particular YouTuber called Terrible Writing Advice. He is awesome, he is worth watching, and there are times when I just can't focus on anything, can't do anything fun or creative, so I just turn on his videos because when I get in a mood like that, I can't watch even movies. I can't sit still long enough mentally to deal with it. But his videos are just the right length that I can get through some of them, even in a mood like that. He's talking about world building, and he mentioned how let's ignore the only planet with life we know of, and do what Star Wars does, and do monoclimates for biomes. And that's actually quite hilarious, because Earth is the only life-bearing planet we know of. And yet, Star Wars consistently and constantly does these mono-biome planets. And our world is very weird. If someone were to, in a fictional story, just say there's a continent on their world that not constantly, but has these powerful storms that occur certain times a year that are so powerful they can wipe a whole town off the map, they might get called out for it. But North America, the continent I live on, has a section of the country that has storms so powerful that if they hit a town, the town gets wiped off the map. I'm of course referring to F5 tornadoes. If they even still call it F5s, they have a couple different tornado scales, but the way I learned it was F0 to F5, so F5 is what I use. And those are horribly destructive, and if it hits a town, the town gets wiped off the map. And that's real. There's a real place on this planet where there's an eternal thunderstorm, practically. It's not a particular single storm, it's just a series of storms that keep happening in almost perpetuity, because in Venezuela there's this lake that hits a certain spot where it's close enough, I think, to the ocean, but has no moisture thing going on, and the fronts just collide perfectly to create nothing but endless storms. That sounds impossible, and yet there it is, in Venezuela. The polar regions have their own weird things going on with the winter months where there is no night in the North Pole. And I think it goes opposite with no days in the other pole. I think they might do likewise. And the thing is, that's not usually played up in like something like Star Wars. So I think sci-fi really needs to lean into borrowing Earth stuff and maybe trying to exaggerate it, but on the other hand, how can you exaggerate such a weird world? And then there's less planet scale stuff and shrinking down. There's this post I've seen on Tumblr, and I've actually reblogged it on my Tumblr. It starts off with one Tumblr blogger, and I'm going to link to the post below, by the way. So I think the original person who starts off the chain is called Gaudius Petronius or something like that. Maybe biggest Gaudius Petronius might be their Tumblr URL. And they mentioned how if they did a dystopia where the megacorp had a smirk for a logo, they would be called a hack writer. And then they show the picture of Amazon's logo. And then the next person chimes in with another evil megacorp whose symbol could be an apple with a bite taken out of it, and they'd be called out for severe Bible allegory, and yet Apple, says the person who's currently recording on an Apple laptop. Okay, look, I can't destroy apples, but I have unfortunately destroyed at least 2 PCs and counting. So I have to use an apple because I can't destroy them. It does kind of point towards them marching towards being evil overlords, not even getting to the whole spying on people's photos thing. I digress. And I've actually got an example not too far from me. There's a town near where I live whose name I won't say directly, but their name means nice. Like, it's like a Sunnydale situation. Their name is something nice and like that. And yet, the zip code for this town ends in 666. No joke. This town is not 15 minutes from where I live, and its zip code ends in 666, and its name is something you would give to a town that totally doesn't have an evil cult, guys. They're just called Nice Place. Surrounded by other places with nice in the name. Like Nice Union and Nice Valley and all that stuff. And yet, the town has zip code ending in 666. If I did that in a story, like if I imported that town wholesale into a story I was writing, I might get called out for doing, oh yes, that's so blatant. And yet, it's a real place, not too far from where I live, and that is exactly how it goes. And again, it's because when you write fiction, you want your audience to suspend their disbelief. And when you add completely ridiculous stuff in, you sometimes disrupt that suspension of disbelief. And that's where reality has the advantage, because fiction has to get you to buy it, but reality has no obligation to make you buy it because you're already in reality. There's no buying to be done. So, like I said, long story short, Mark Twain actually sums it up really nicely with that quote. But it's still fun to think about all the crazy stuff that is in reality, that if you put it in fiction, you get called out for it. So, how do you deal with stuff like that? If you want to add more of the crazy elements of reality into your fiction, well, you can either just put it in there and deal with it, or I suppose you could try to look things up on how they work, which is hard whenever I don't think we totally understand how a lot of stuff works on Earth. We just kind of do it. Like flying. We figured out how to fly before we figured out why we fly. I don't even know, like I said, I'm not a science person, so I don't know if we understand full things of flight. We probably do. That's probably just me being an English major and not well versed in science. But I know that we figured out how to fly before we figured out how we fly. Because the Wright brothers were engineers, not the fiddly science type people. And now I know I just called all the analytical scientists fiddly types, but said I'm just an English major who's just talking about an interesting quirk of writing. So this is where I'll sign off. Me and the fuzzball here.